Hi, I'm Catherine Ayers-Wickenhauser, Director of Communications at Direct Trust, and I'm so excited today to be joined by Tim Freund from Banner Health. Tim, welcome. Can you tell us more about yourself and more about your roles at Banner Health?
Well, thank you for having me, Catherine. I've been a paramedic for over 20 years, and back from the paper documentation days all the way through to our electronic charting days. I started with Banner Health about 5 years ago in the role of a pre-hospital coordinator, and currently I serve as the associate flight manager for one of Banner Air's air medical bases. But this, I guess, this project that I started in my old role as the pre-hospital coordinator has carried on into my new role as well.
Great. And, I'm interested to learn more about this pre-hospital coordinator position because I think it is so important. My general understanding of it is that it has to do with patients and the handoff involved from EMS to the hospital. So can you tell us more about that role?
Yeah, so the pre-hospital coordinator works with the fire and EMS agencies that bring patients into the hospital, and then they help the hospital staff with a lot of the other issues that may have either started outside of the hospital or even within the hospital, because a lot of hospitals are looking for the metrics of for trauma patients or for stroke patients or for patients having a heart attack. And they need the important information from that EMS chart, and there's several different ways of getting it. But most people aren't really taking advantage of the most efficient way of getting the patient care information from the EMS record into the hospital healthcare record. So as the pre-hospital coordinator, I was working with a couple of our agencies very closely. We had two agencies that brought us 90% of our EMS patients, which I was very fortunate that they were very responsive. I would meet with their EMS captains and their battalion chiefs, invite them to some of our staff meetings with our program managers, like our stroke program manager, our trauma program manager, and even our ED director enjoyed having them. So when an EMS crew brings a patient to the hospital, what we were doing a couple of years ago, they would print off the chart from their Tough Book or from their iPad because they had done their electronic documentation. And this electronic document would go to a cloud somewhere, but we were still asking them to print up a physical copy of this chart. And then they would go down the hallway and hand it off to the health unit coordinator and ask the health unit coordinator to take this paper document and make it electronic again. And as we're kind of looking at this, we're like, wait a minute, we're taking something that is electronic to make it physical paper to make it electronic again. And it didn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. Additionally, because I mentioned my colleagues like the trauma program manager and the EMS or the stroke program manager and the STEMI program manager, they're like, hey, Tim, where's this chart from this stroke patient or this trauma patient? Because we weren't getting all of those charts. Sometimes the papers got lost. Sometimes the scan went bad. Sometimes the crews weren't even leaving the chart. So they said, I spent a lot of my time trying to retrieve these charts, going somewhere else, looking this, and it was consuming a lot of my day. So we didn't have good intel. We weren't capturing all of the charts. And as we started looking at it, we realized, hey, we're missing a lot of our charts. And it would take the work of an army of people to retrieve all of these charts. If just with the average EMS call volume of about 40 patients per day, that would take me it took me about 7 minutes per chart just to find and then print up. And then it would take somebody else about 5 minutes to scan and upload. And then there would still be a delay. So we're talking 12 minutes times 40 patients a day, which is 480 minutes. So that's 8 hours. I'm like, wait a minute, somebody's spending their whole day chasing down paper. And this doesn't really work. So we came forward with this new process, or we learned about this new process where we can share electronic records in a secure manner because everybody's scared of being hacked. So we kind of piloted this new process called direct messaging. And what we do is we use a direct secure messaging address that goes to a secure inbox so that trained people can go in there and help us match the record to the real patient in live time. That's the benefit of this, is there's no delay. Within minutes of the EMS crew being completed or documenting being completed with their patient care record, hit send, and it goes lightning bolts to a cloud, and we're part of that cloud that gets that information. And now we're able to take that and immediately put it into the patient's record. So the ER doctor can actually look and see what the EMS crew documented if he wasn't there for the handoff. The ED nurse could go and look at see what EMS had documented if they were covering for somebody else on a lunch. Or in the hospital where I was working as a level 3 trauma center and as a primary stroke center, we sent a lot of patients out. And that receiving trauma physician or that receiving stroke neurologist could actually read the EMS crew's chart before the patient arrived at their facility. So they can pair that with the ED physician visit summary that they could look at, because that's already electronic, the doctor's notes from the sending hospital, and they pair that with the EMS crew's notes, and they have a bigger picture, a more accurate picture of the patient, whether it's allergies or medications or past medical history, or what did the car look like, because EMS crews were including pictures of the damage from the vehicle, or how did they document that fast exam? What did that 12 lead look like? All of those things were being gathered in that electronic chart, and now it's in the hospital's chart at the same time. So that was kind of what we started doing with our fire and EMS crews in my role as a pre-hospital coordinator at Banner Del Webb.
And, I'm sure this is resonating for so many people right now, because they think of their own processes in their own facilities and the organizations that they've been to. And in general, many times there seemed to be a lack of interoperability or a lot of paper. You perfectly described that on paper or electronic to be on paper and then go back to electronic, and clearly identified, 8 hours of someone's day just doing that process, and there's a better way. And so I'm sure for people listening, they're thinking, aha, this is an Interop Hero interview. So what happened? And you described so well kind of the opportunity that certain types of interoperability provide, like direct secure messaging. And maybe as a next step, so for those who are listening, who are relating to this and relating to your story, can you talk about what you did to implement the solution? Did you pilot it? How did you roll it out? And maybe walk the listeners today through that process.
Sure. And actually, I have to give due credit. It wasn't my idea. I found through working with one of my fire and EMS agencies, they said, hey, we want to try this one system. And it was very proprietary. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Proprietary is not going to work, because it might work for you and me, which is great, and we can have this great relationship. But how do we get something that that works for you and other hospitals, and it works for me and other fire and EMS organizations? And we started looking at some of the options, and they came to me with this direct messaging process, with this secure direct messaging. They mentioned that they were working with this group called No2, and that No2 was working with not just ImageTrend, but other EPCR vendors to create like a Google Translate, if you will, or a network aggregator kind of effect with all of the EPCR platforms and all of the electronic healthcare record systems that hospitals are using. Because we had other people trying to sell a whole big package, and it only worked for one EPCR platform, or it only worked for one EHR vendor. So through this direct secure messaging, they said, hey, it really doesn't matter. And I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't matter? Like, we could be using any variety of EPCR platforms, and it could be shared with any variety of electronic healthcare records. And I'm like, well, this sounds like a great idea. So I said, tell me more. So what they said is, well, because we bring you most of our patients, we want to set up a direct secure connection with you guys. And how do we do that? And the idea that came back was this direct secure address that we send the messages to. And they send their chart as an attachment in a PDF platform. So the PDF already packages it in a very nice and neat way of doing this. So now I have to get the investment from our IT department and our HIMSS people, because we have to be protected. And IT's like, well, if it's just a one-way message, it's secure. Okay, I don't see any problem with it. They're not asking for any information back. So then I had to work with our HIMSS component, our health information management systems, and say, how do we get this in here? And as it turns out, the EHR platform that we use within Banner Health already has a method of doing this. And they said, we already have these direct secure messages. We could build this really easily. And I'm like, okay, let's do that. And so now I go and I give the direct secure messaging address to my fire and EMS agency, and we go about mapping it through and saying, okay, how is this going to work? And we just come upon the go live date, and we go through a little bit of training, because those HUCs that used to receive, the health unit coordinators who used to receive the paper charts, they're still my natural workload, and it's part of their workload. So we train them on how to look for these messages and then how to match them, because what we were finding as I would look up charts for trauma program managers is there's errors. Like, that's not the right chart. And we were having 5 to 10% error rates, which are somewhat of a problem when we're talking about accuracy in healthcare. So we trained them to look for the right chart, and we were able to improve the accuracy of our of matching our patients' records at the same time that we were improving our capture rate. So we went from missing sometimes up to 50% of our charts from one agency to capturing not greater than 90% of our charts from all of our EMS patients in the matter of 3 months. I mean, it was just that fast of a turnaround. And for a hospital that was receiving between 1,100 to 1,400 patients in a month, that's a significant number for just one hospital. But I looked at it and I had a little bit of foresight, because if it's going to work for me and it's really going to be interoperable, then I want to make it work for the rest of the healthcare facilities within the Banner Health system. So I laid the groundwork, and I made sure that we had the direct secure messaging addresses for the other Banner Health facilities, so that later on, it's just turnkey, just cut and paste, flip the switch, and we're good to go. So we started off with our first little demo, and I was the only person doing it because I didn't really understand how easy it was going to be. And I wanted to make sure that HIMSS was happy with the accuracy rate. And when I realized, wow, that was easy. Like, I just matched this patient's record in about 20 seconds. It took me 7 clicks on my computer mouse or on my touchpad, 7 clicks, where it used to be the HUC who would label each page and then hand load each page into a scanner. And then when I go back to look at the record, I look at it 1 page at a time and have to wait for the next page to load and the next page. And if you have a 10-page chart, that's huge. So now I find us loading charts that are 25, 30 pages long, and it takes less than 20 seconds and 7 clicks to put it in there. And you can scroll through as fast as you can scroll. So it really sped up the process immensely.
And can you tell me a little bit more too about maybe the handoff piece too? So kind of going back to what we discussed earlier, and knowing that this is such a critical handoff time, when a patient is coming in from EMS, really seconds matter. It's so critical. And so it's interesting to hear what you described earlier about what that handoff process was before, and missing charts. And certainly you identified increasing patient matching and capturing more charts and getting them more quickly. But maybe to take it a step further and to quantify it a little bit more, what did that look like?
Well, when I looked through the resources with my HIMSS people, I looked at how many reports we were supposed to have annually. And we're talking 6 figures worth of EMS reports that we were supposed to be capturing annually based upon the number of patients being brought into the overall healthcare system for Banner Health. And when I asked HIMSS to run a report for that file type, they told me, yeah, we've got a couple thousand. And I said, whoa, you're telling me we're capturing as a system less than 10%. And they're like, yes. I'm like, that's kind of a problem. And we have to fix this. We have to try and fix this fast. So understanding that I was fortunate to have agencies that worked with me very closely. They were doing electronic charting already. I knew I was going to have greater successes if I worked this on a small scale first, because when you start talking big scale, now you're talking about big costs, and that really scares a lot of people, as it should. So we started a pilot process at Del Webb, and I said, okay, I'm going to chase those other 100,000 charts later, but those aren't even at my hospital, because at my hospital we get approximately 30,000, 25 to 30,000 EMS patients a year. I'll just focus on those. So we worked with our two main local agencies, and we set up this process so that we would capture all of the charts that they send to us, not necessarily to the other hospitals. And within the first month, we looked at about 1,000 records, and we were able to bring those in. We were able to demonstrate the time savings, but even more so, the accuracy of being able to match the record to the correct patient and to the correct encounter, because the patient might have multiple encounters. And the error rate, I think I mentioned it was like between 5 and 10% with this matching, and then somebody else has to do this other workload to correct that that problem. Well, I went through over 10,000 matched charts before I detected one error. Like, I manually audited this once a week to catch all of those charts before I detected an error. And it was, again, a similar name between two different patients who ironically came to the hospital approximately the same time. And I could see where that would happen, but we had less than a 0.01% error rate, because that was one record out of 10,000 versus the 5 to 10% error rate that we had previously. And another great thing that we discovered was, when of course, this benefits the hospital. And because we want to make this beneficial for our fire and EMS partners as well, because we need their buy-in, we were able to show that they didn't have to stick around to finish their chart, that they could actually send it electronically, and that increased their return to service, or they'd be back in service sooner. So they had fewer calls waiting or fewer mutual aid requests if they could finish their chart on their way to their next call. And we still get it, and now we were capturing that many more charts.
And I think that's just incredible too, because, EMS is critically important. It's a critically important piece of our infrastructure. And so for EMS to be able to return or take on additional calls and turn it around quickly, that's also critical. Getting the right information to the right people at the right time, huge. That's why we're talking today, but also that component too of having EMS be ready to go out and take care of another patient possibly, that's also huge. So, it sounds like this project has been tremendously successful, and I'm curious if other hospitals or local organizations followed suit, and if so, what that looked like.
Well, and before I answer that question, Catherine, I did want to say, looking back at the last 3 years, so if we reference this is 2022, and we've all been dealing with the pandemic, having those fire and EMS crews back out responding and understanding the stress level of the hospital providers not being able to retain everything that was told to them. So I do think it was very timely and fortunate that we were able to implement this before the COVID pandemic, and we've had this in place. So I didn't even really think of it that way. But to answer your question, the problem of capturing charts from the fire and EMS crews was not just my problem at Banner Del Webb, and it wasn't just a Banner Health problem. It was a problem across the other healthcare systems in the greater Phoenix area. There's Abrazo Health, there's Dignity Health, there's Honor Health, there's Valleywise. So it was a universal problem. The pre-hospital coordinators, we would meet regardless of healthcare system. We would meet 3 or 4 times a year, kind of a quarterly meeting, to share our experiences, to share our successes, to share any failures we might have. And I said, wait a minute, I'm not alone in this. I think this would be a great project for everybody else to benefit from as well. And as I looked at it, my second agency that joined up for the direct messaging project, they are in 2 different geographic areas. And in their second geographic area, they're working with Dignity Health, a second healthcare system. And I reached out to my colleague at that hospital, and I said, hey, this fire and EMS agency, they're doing this direct messaging thing, and they're sending us these messages in a secure manner. And he's like, huh? I said, yeah, we're getting the charts in seconds, uploading them seconds later. He's like, how do I benefit from that? So I asked that second fire and EMS agency, hey, have you guys considered doing this for your the Dignity Health Hospital that you guys transport to as well? They're like, well, all we have to do is get their direct secure messaging address. I'm like, yeah. And I said, and I explained to my colleague, all you have to do is set up this direct secure messaging address. And he's like, is it that easy? I'm like, yeah, it's just that easy. And then I did a demonstration for him, like, a closed loop demonstration. I said, just you and me on this meeting. I'm going to match a couple of patient care records. He's like, wait, it's in there now? And I said, yeah, this is in the tracking board. I'm like, hey, wait, I use the same EHR vendor. I'm like, I know, this will work great for you. He's like, oh, I'm going to start doing this. And he did. So now we've got 2 fire and EMS agencies, 2 different healthcare systems using this process. And I'm like, does anybody else want to learn about this? So he's like, yeah, I'll tell you guys all about it too. This is great. So I realized that we had the success going between 2 hospital systems now, and I wanted to share it within my system at the same time. So I came up with little 1-page tip sheets and teaching sheets and instructional tools to teach other people who are going to monitor the message center, the direct secure messaging pool of incoming messages. And I said, here's how you do this. And then I would do a couple of demonstrations. And then other people would be like, wait a minute, what's this thing that I heard about from this other guy at this other hospital? And I'm like, yeah, like, well, we have a different EHR vendor. We don't use the same one that you do. Okay, but I think we can still do the same thing because it's not proprietary. It doesn't matter. It's like, well, my fire and EMS agency doesn't use the same EPCR vendor that your agencies do. I understand. You guys can use that fire and EMS agency can do it as well because it's non-proprietary. So I helped them connect with the people who can make the interoperability happen between different EPCR platforms and EHR platforms. And I said, here's how you do this. And they're like, why are you not keeping this a secret? And I'm like, this is everybody's problem, right? Because if my mom is somewhere on the other side of town and she gets taken to a hospital that's not close to home, they don't have access to her records. I'm never going to be able to see those records in a timely manner if she's having a stroke, or if my daughter becomes a trauma patient and she ends up in a trauma center. They're not going to have that trauma record. I want everybody to benefit from it. So when I started showing them how easy it was, and I shared with them the pathway that I took, and I said, hey, here's my playbook. Like, take my name out of it, take my agency out of it, and just follow these steps. And they're like, huh, I can do that too. And I'm like, yeah, you can. So now direct secure messaging has been around for my hospital for a little over 2 years. And I've seen this promulgate into the other healthcare systems, Abrazo Healthcare, Honor Health, and then Dignity Health as well. And there's other healthcare systems still coming on board. And now we've got multiple EPCR platforms that are doing this between ImageTrend and Zoe and EMS charts. These are all interoperable with different places. And it doesn't matter whether the primary hospital you go to uses Cerner and the other hospital that you're transporting to uses Epic, because as long as you have their direct secure messaging address and you hit send and it's programmed behind the scenes, it's going to go there and somebody's going to be able to capture that record. And the other thing was, it doesn't require any retraining of the fire and EMS agencies, because with respect to my fire and EMS brethren, we like our routines. We don't like to change. And what's really cool about this is all of the magic happens behind the curtains. So it doesn't change the way they do anything, except it maybe puts them back in service for that next 911 call faster. So they don't have to do anything differently. They still finish their chart and hit send, but they're doing it on their way to their next call. So now that we have this spread out across all of our Banner Health facilities in Arizona, I trained my other pre-hospital coordinators to manage their pools. And we see this being used at our trauma centers, at our primary stroke centers. It's coming on board with our regional hospitals too, because they're like, hey, wait, this is really cool. And I still get emails from the pre-hospital coordinators or the fire chiefs saying, hey, can you show me how this works and why we want to do this? And when they realize this doesn't cost an arm and a leg, that it works all around the healthcare system, they're like, oh, we definitely want to be a part of this, because it's still, in a way, it's still cutting edge. Because when I first went back and I took this to the HIMSS team, like the bigger picture at Banner Health, they said, well, we've got other processes in place in other states. We've got other health information exchanges. And I'm like, but this isn't necessarily an exchange. Like, well, we might end up going this way. And I'm like, okay, but I have this now. We're doing this now. It takes from start to finish. I think we can get somebody up to speed in less than 3 weeks. And I'm like, I can do this in 3 weeks, and then I can turn it off in less time than that when you have something better to do. But right now, this is the best thing that's out there because it doesn't cost a lot. There's no real change in the way the front end user works it from the fire and EMS agency. And the training is very rapid on the back end for the people who are pulling the records. And as I asked for feedback from my health unit coordinators when we started doing this, I'm like, so are you okay with this? Like, is this too much work? They're like, no, this is less work. I said, you're a little more computer savvy because you might be a little bit younger. But then I went to some of my older health unit coordinators. I'm like, are you okay with this? They're like, yeah, this doesn't require you to be tech savvy. You just got to click a few buttons and make sure that it matches. So we really did have great success. And we shared that success because we want everybody to benefit from this. And I'm still excited about it because when I transitioned into a new role, I think we were able to get an air medical company involved in doing direct secure messaging, which again, you're transporting patients from one end of the state to another end of the state, and they might not ever see those EMS records unless we can share them rapidly, accurately, and securely through this direct messaging.
And one of the things that's so exciting to me about hearing your perspective and having you share it is that you really did take that team approach. We think a lot about interoperability in the industry, the people who are steeped in interoperability, and hearing stories like yours are refreshing because we know that there's ground to make up. We know that there's progress that needs to be made, but a lot of what's needed is here. And there's this lack of education. There's ground that we need to make up in education and letting people know what's possible. So I love that you took the team approach and educated those in your community. That's huge. And so I think for people who are listening and inspired by what happened in your story and what you went through and how that has that ripple effect, do you think maybe you could describe a little bit more about any buy-in beyond what you've already described, or if you had any tips for people as they might look to implement this in their own organizations, anything that you would offer up front?
Sure. And this was actually really educational for me because I didn't understand. I mean, being a field medic for 20 plus years, I was like, here's my chart, see you bye, right? And maybe I could follow up later and see how the patient did. But I really had to go backwards and figure out who was going to be on my team and navigate that because it was a bigger picture. But it really took the buy-in of my director at the time to say, hey, I want to try this. I want to go out on a limb. And my director said, okay, we can do that. She's like, go for it. And I said, okay, I think this is how we're going to do this. And I kept it very, very small initially as we started to roll it out because, of course, I wanted it to be successful, but to have that level of control. But I shared with people little nuggets and success stories as I went, and I kind of kept their interest so what's new this month, Tim? How many patients did you guys match this month? Did you have any problems? Were there any mismatched patients? And I was doing this on a monthly basis with my program managers, but I showed my director, I said, look, we're doing this and we're being very successful. She's like, well, I want you to tell the rest of the ED directors, the ED nursing directors across the system that this is going to work. I'm like, okay, I'll do a demonstration for them. And some of the demonstrations that I did, I pulled live files and I said, look, this patient was, they were written to be transferred from our hospital to a level 1 trauma center, but it shows in the healthcare record that their EMS chart was matched before they even left our hospital. And the nursing director's like, wait a minute, you're saying that the trauma surgeon could look at the EMS chart that the receiving crew did even before they got transferred out of your facility? I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, well, that's fast. I made the reference to like Jimmy Johnson, how freakishly fast this is. So, and I said, look, we're able to do the same thing with a stroke patient. Oh, really? I'm like, yeah, we can get their FAST exam and their VAN exam and whatever other exams EMS took, and the receiving stroke neurologist can say, oh, they're last known well time is this. Oh, we can still do certain things. So we shared with them all of this, and they're like, yeah, we want everybody to do it. And I'm like, funny story is, if I send out one email right now, you guys could do this tomorrow. And they're like, what do you mean? Well, we'd laid in all those direct secure messaging addresses so that all we had to do is get people to start checking the inbox and start training people to match this. So it worked, you know, and the analogy that I kind of used for this was I took somebody's idea like a seed and I kind of planted it in the area that I knew. And then as it starts sprouting, I'm like, oh, look, I have kind of a tree here, like a little sapling kind of thing. Everybody else started noticing the tree too. And the tree is continuing to get bigger and bigger. And I'm really excited to see where this tree may take us in the next 1 to 2 years. It's spreading very, very quickly. So No2 was integral in helping walk us through the each and every little step that it would take to do just for our, not only for our pilot process, but how we can expand this across the healthcare system at Banner Health. And then every time I had somebody else at another fire and EMS agency, if they were using the same or different EPCR platform, I would say, hey, you got to talk to No2, they'll march out the steps for you. Or if I worked with somebody at a hospital who said, hey, what's this direct messaging thing that the fire department's talking about? How do we do this? I said, well, here's the steps that you go through. And No2 would reach out to that pre-hospital coordinator at that hospital and help them with those steps to set things up. So it was very fortunate that there is somebody out there who is that network aggregator who's trying to get the left hand and the right hand to talk to each other all the time to make sure that everything lines up.
And I think it's so incredible to hear your perspective and how this has all come together. And I think many people listening can relate. This is a very relatable situation of many people have been in the ER and they've seen kind of that handoff that takes place and understanding how it can be used in other areas of care as well. You know, you mentioned flight and how critical that time is too. So I thank you for leading this effort in your area and for being part of Team Interop and evangelizing interoperability with your peers and with your region. And as we conclude today's Interop Hero discussion, I'm curious, do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom that you'd like to leave on?
I just tell people to take a chance and see the benefit of this. It doesn't take a lot of effort, and it's really got this perpetual motion because once you get it going, it really picks up steam. You know, I'm feel very grateful that I was in the right place at the right time. I found the right people to work with, and you know, I'm glad we were able to make this something beneficial for everyone because this is such a great project and it doesn't deserve to be small scale. It deserves to be large scale. And once you get it started, there's really very little maintenance on it. There's ways that I've discovered I can try and streamline things, but it gets started and it just keeps going and going and going. But if you can't find a benefit to this, where it's an improved workflow for your HIMSS department or your health unit coordinator, or gathering more data or capturing more charts or more accurate documentation, then I don't know how to explain it to you any better because this kind of captures all of those things.
Well, Tim, congratulations again on being an Interop hero. Love that analogy of the tree. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
My pleasure.
And to find more spotlight interviews like this, visit directtrust.org/Interop Hero.